These are the most surprising mergers and acquisitions in tech history, and we're going to rank them. My name's Jeremy Roberts. I'm a senior director here at Infotech, and I love mergers and acquisitions, so let's get into it. All right, so it looks like we got 10 M&As to rank today. I'm pretty excited about this. I'm seeing a lot of names that I recognize. So let's start with an early one. I think this IBM one probably refers to the foundation of IBM. So just some quick history here. IBM actually wasn't founded as a company called IBM. IBM was founded by the merger of 4 separate companies, probably the most important of which was the Tabulating Machine Company, which was founded by a guy named Herman Hollerith, which invented the punch card and actually did a whole bunch of census work in the late 19th century. So, shout out to Herman Hollerith for doing the Tsarist Russian census in the 1890s. Anyway, that merged with 3 other companies, in 1911 to form the Computing, Tabulating, and Recording Company. So initially, this IBM predecessor did stuff like make scales and make tabulating equipment and make punch cards and things like that. And then in 1924, under the direction of a guy that you might have heard of, his name was Thomas J. Watson. So the name Watson is plastered all over IBM's history. It was ultimately constituted as the company IBM, which was originally the Canadian subsidiary of CTR. So that's a fun fact for you. So in 1924, so more than 100 years ago, IBM was created, and they just totally dominated mid-century technology, like totally dominated. They were the biggest contractor forever. The US government was suing them left and right for antitrust violations, although to the best of my knowledge, it only resulted in some consent decrees and things. And they had like 500,000 employees and tens of billions of dollars in revenue, just totally unheard of for an IT company. So that's a definite S-tier acquisition or merger anyway. Let's look at the next one on our list here. HP and Compaq. So HP was not an M&A. It was actually 2 guys who founded it named Hewlett and Packard, and they did it in a garage in California, which you can still visit. It's called the HP Garage. Maybe our editors will be kind enough to pop a picture of that up on the screen there. And they bought Compaq. Well, it was really more of a merger. And this one's super interesting because the Compaq people, they were extremely excited for this acquisition to go through, and HP's board fought like a proxy fight, and the kids of the founders and board members didn't like it, and it was a whole thing. And then when it went through, the stock tanked briefly. You can go look at HP's stock chart in like 2002 and you can see this. And then a couple years later, the CEO of HP, a woman named Carly Fiorina, was actually fired, and many argue that it was a result of sort of fallout from this acquisition. But ultimately, HP was able to regain their footing. Okay, and they could have done a lot worse out of this acquisition. And if I look at this tier list, it looks like there's a couple on here where, maybe the results were a little bit less favorable. So we're going to give this one a solid C. It doesn't, nothing to write home about, but not a total catastrophic failure like some people argued that it was at the time. They sort of found their footing after a little while. Next up on our list, what do we have here? Let's look at Google and YouTube. So this one's from, I believe, 2006, and this is a definite A tier, and let me explain why. So Google was this sort of fledgling search engine, but they made a lot of money off of ads. And they tried their own video platform. You might remember this, it was called Google Video, but it never really took off. And YouTube was this company that was founded in 2005, and it was actually a dating site, if you can believe it. It was a dating site with a really good video player. And the dating thing didn't really work out, but the video player thing did. And then it got to the point that it was actually too expensive for them to operate it because bandwidth is not cheap, right? Anybody who's ever run a data center can tell you that. And so they ended up selling to Google for $1.65 billion. The founders got a few $100 million each, and Google took it and ran with it. And for a long time, they didn't break out revenue, but they started doing it recently. I think in 2024, they did something like $36 billion a year. And that's a ton of money. That's just an ad revenue. They have other streams as well. So they're a definite contributor to the bottom line. They're about as big in revenue terms as like Netflix. So Google's got this search engine, and then they also happen to just own this Netflix-sized thing. The only reason I don't give this an S is because it's also brought them a lot of headaches. YouTube's been at the center of a lot of controversies. It's been expensive for them to maintain. We're not 100% clear on the profitability. There's been some issues around copyright, but definitely YouTube is the one to beat in the long-form internet content game. And many of you are probably watching this on YouTube right now, so it's a definite A tier acquisition. Up next, we've got another Google one. So this is Android, and this is an easy S tier. Easy S tier, probably the easiest on this whole list. So Android is a mobile operating system. It was founded by a guy named Andy Rubin. That's why it's called Android. Google bought it, and I want to say about 2005, but we'll put the right year up on the screen if that's not the right one. They bought it for something like $50 million, around $50 million. The exact amount hasn't been disclosed. and they got something like 71%, 72% of the global mobile operating system market share. That's Android. So 50 million bucks, a little elbow grease, and 70+% of the global mobile operating system market. That's a deal that I would take any day and twice on Sunday. So that's a definite S-tier acquisition. And many of you are probably watching this on YouTube on your Android devices, okay? So it's clear that that's gonna be a top-tier acquisition. But they can't all be good. There are some bad ones here too, for sure. So let's look at another HP acquisition, and this was Autonomy. So Autonomy was a company founded by a guy named Mike Lynch and a couple others. It was in the enterprise software space. It was based out of the UK. And they did enterprise content management, right? Intelligent search, stuff like that. And HP wanted to get into this higher margin business, right? And they'd had, a couple of issues with their Compaq acquisition. And so I think around 2011, they decided they were going to buy Autonomy and integrate its offerings. The problem was that they alleged some accounting irregularities, and they had to write down something like $8 billion in the value of their Autonomy stake. And they paid around $11 billion for it, depending on who you look at, what source. I think something like 10.2 billion is the number I saw. And that, of course, is not good when you have to write down the massive value of your acquisition. And the CFO of Autonomy at the time of the acquisition ended up being convicted criminally for defrauding HP, and a couple of the co-founders actually were charged criminally in the United States and extradited from the UK for their role in the HP fiasco of the acquisition. They were acquitted, and then while celebrating his acquittal, the founder, Mike Lynch, actually died in a freak yachting accident off the coast of Italy, and his co-defendant died in a car accident like that same week. Totally freaky stuff. Okay, and if it's freaky, it's got to be F tier, so that's a super low acquisition, so we're going to put that right at the bottom. Next up, we've got Microsoft. So everyone knows Microsoft. Maybe not everyone loves Microsoft. Huge player in the enterprise software space, and they decided they wanted to get into the mobile space as well. So way back in the early 2010s, a former Microsoft executive, a guy named Stephen Elop, moved over to Nokia to run that company. He was the first non-Finnish CEO. And he used his time there to tighten his relationship with his former employer, Microsoft. And eventually he sold the mobile division of Nokia to Microsoft, and then moved over to Microsoft to be like a division president or something like that, or a division vice president. And he, of course, ended up, I guess, overseeing a division that, really didn't bear fruit of the type that Microsoft expected. So they ended up having to write down a ton of value, okay? So Nokia had this operating system called Symbian at the time. They could have gone the Android way, but they chose to, partner up with Microsoft, and it didn't work out. And Microsoft had to take a big charge on it. Nokia sort of got out of the business for a while. So I'm gonna give that a B tier. Actually, yeah, a B tier. I think a B tier is appropriate because you know what? They tried. Just do it! Nobody tries anymore. But Microsoft tried. They said, there's this duopoly of Apple and Android, and competition is good for the world. So we're gonna do something about it. And yeah, they went about it sort of ham-fistedly, and there's all the chat about backroom conspiracies with their former executive being an alleged Trojan horse, but I don't believe any of that. I think they actually tried, and it just didn't work. And more businesses need to do that, especially ones with deep pockets like Microsoft. Speaking of deep pockets, Microsoft bought a company called LinkedIn for $26.2 billion. That was back in 2016 under their new CEO, Satya Nadella. And I would argue that this has been a much less tumultuous acquisition. It hasn't been super exciting. Nothing has, wildly changed. Microsoft was able to get into the social media game. They probably got a ton of good data for training their AI, which I'm sure was very useful to them after large language models sort of became the de facto way to do things. So we're going to give that one probably a solid C. You know what? Maybe a B. Microsoft is a solid B acquisition player. They do some good work. And you know what? LinkedIn's been pretty good. Actually, you know what? I take this back. They send me a lot of annoying emails. We're going to bump them right down to a C. Next up, this is a fun one. So there's this company called Frank. They're probably the smallest company on this list, actually. And they were acquired in 2021 by JP Morgan for $175 million. And what Frank did was they helped students apply for federal student aid in the United States, essentially. So they built a big customer list, and they were supposed to be like a company that assisted you on your collegiate journey, which is, of course, a very exciting thing, and there's a lot of opportunity there. Higher education's big business. We all know that. JP Morgan wanted to sink its teeth into that market a little bit, and they saw this small company called Frank, founded by this charismatic young woman named Charlie Javis, and they said, you know what? Here's $175 million. Give us your technology. Give us your customer list. Come work at JP Morgan. The issue is that she actually hired a data science professor to make up a big portion of her customer list. And then she sold that list to JP Morgan, who attempted to contact customers, as marketing departments are wont to do, and got a lot of bounce backs. So they sued her, she was criminally charged, and in 2025, she was actually convicted. And after her conviction, she was working as a yoga instructor, she said she couldn't wear her ankle monitor because it was going to interfere with her ability to teach yoga in Florida, I believe. So we'll see if she's allowed to teach yoga in prison. She was on the Forbes 30 under 30. I hope she gets under 30 years. I hope the judge is sympathetic to her cause, because more than 30 years would be a long time for something like this. So we're going to give that an F for Frank. The next one here is Mixer. So they were acquired by Microsoft in 2016, and this is another interesting Microsoft scenario. So Microsoft does this thing where they see that there's a burgeoning business. So mobile operating systems, social media, whatever, and they try and buy their way in. Right? And that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing business. Unless you do it too much, then the Justice Department gets mad at you. But Microsoft decided that they wanted to get into the streaming business and to compete with Facebook and to compete with Twitch, who's a really big player there. So they bought Mixer for an undisclosed amount, and they brought over a bunch of talent. So if you're under 30, you probably have heard of a guy named Ninja who plays video games of some kind professionally. I think Fortnite is what the kids are playing these days, as far as I understand it. And so they brought them over, they did their best. Ultimately, it just didn't work out. So they purchased it in 2016 and they shut it down by 2020. But again, you know what? I'm going to give them a B because they tried, okay? And I believe so much in the value of effort. And I wish more companies would do this. So Microsoft took a big swing and they missed, but that's okay because they'll be all right. Something tells me that they will be fine. Azure can pay for a lot of failed social media acquisitions. All right, and then the last one on this list is probably going to be the one that raises the blood pressure of the IT people watching. So for those of you who are uninitiated, there's this company. It's probably the biggest company you've never heard of. It's called VMware. It was founded in the late 90s because its founders had successfully virtualized the x86 architecture, which is a complicated way of saying they had introduced a layer between like the hardware and the operating system that made it possible for you to be more flexible with your IT infrastructure. Kind of a big deal. They did some end-user computing stuff as well, like mobile device management. So when your company wants to spy on you, VMware had a solution for that. And they were independent, and then they were owned by Dell, and then they were sort of spun off, and then this company called Broadcom bought them. And Broadcom is a competitor. They make chips. They're a competitor of Qualcomm, which they also tried to buy. But of late, they've been sort of this tech PE company, just buying up everything. And their strategy is always to be, let's say, maybe a little bit more customer hostile than most customers would like. Customers don't like it when you're hostile to them. And so they bought VMware and they decided that they were going to end perpetual licensing. So that means that everything would become a subscription, and people just love subscriptions. So that went over very well. And they also decided that they were going to focus pretty heavily on their highest paying customers, right? They call them the whales, right? And so that's been their new strategy. So if you are a Broadcom shareholder, maybe it's an S-tier acquisition. If you are a low-spend VMware customer and you don't get access to any of the new free tools, maybe it's an F-tier acquisition. So I'm going to split the difference, and I'm going to call it a C-tier acquisition, because I think if I went any higher, my system administrator friends would hunt me down. And so that is a tier list. Okay, and I'm sure that there's all sorts of other mergers and acquisitions that you would like me to talk about that I didn't have time to in this video. So please drop those in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe for more content like this.